This is the Chris Berry Show. Expert information on elder law, retirement, and estate planning. Information that you can understand. Here's your host, Chris Berry.
Welcome to the Chris Berry Show, and happy St. Patrick's Day. Today we're going to talk about making sure your pot of gold lasts as long as possible, and we're going to talk about some retirement savings milestones, a century of planning. So we're going to talk about protecting that gold of yours that you've worked so hard to accumulate over your life. And then in our third segment today, we're going to, of course, get into our questions and answers. So questions from our listeners, and I will provide you some answers. Hopefully they're right answers. Just kidding. So with that, let's talk about retirement savings milestones and a century of planning. And what we're going to talk about is some important dates and ages. I have a birthday coming up, actually a milestone birthday coming up. But what we're going to talk about is some of the milestones in your retirement savings plan. So the first step is to start saving. So when can you start saving for retirement? Well, as soon as you start having any money coming in. For example, my kids are 6 and 8, and they already have a checking account, and we're working on getting them paid through the company as well. So if you've attended any of our workshops, you see that we're using their likeness in the PowerPoint slides. So they're employees of the firm. So now that they have some income coming in, a minor can contribute to an IRA if they have any type of taxable compensation. So if you have a 15-year-old who's getting a part-time job scooping ice cream, and they have paychecks coming in, taxable compensation, then they can open up an IRA and can make an IRA contribution. So IRA contributions for 2019, the limit is $6,000. So let's say you have a 15-year-old daughter. She earned $2,000 scooping ice cream. She'd be able to contribute $2,000 to her IRA. So it's the lesser of the yearly contribution limit, $6,000, or her taxable compensation, $2,000. So that child could be starting their own retirement plan as soon as they have any type of taxable compensation. Now, taking it one step further, maybe even a better way for that young minor child to start saving would be, instead of opening up an IRA, what he or she could do is open up a Roth IRA. So, for example, one example would be, let's say that as an enticement to savings, maybe a parent would match contributions to a Roth IRA. So the difference between the traditional IRA and the Roth is that the traditional IRA, the money goes in pre-tax, but when you take the money out, you have to pay income tax on it. Versus the Roth money goes in post-tax, meaning the money has already been taxed, but now when you take that money out, that money is tax-free, so you get tax-free growth. So imagine having a large contributions to a Roth when you're a child and allowing all that compounding, all that growth to come out tax-free. I'd much rather have that versus a traditional IRA where you put in the money pre-tax. Sure, you grow that money, but also what do you grow? You grow a tax bill. So I think a cooler or neater alternative would be looking at enticing young minor children to contribute to a Roth IRA. But it's something to think about as young people are entering the workforce. They're having opportunities to potentially save money and start the retirement savings. So don't think that this is only for those 40 and over. Even a minor child can start their retirement savings. Now, important to understand, under the age of 59 and a half, so before that money that you put into those tax-deferred accounts, understand that before age 59 and a half, if you're to take the money out, you could have some problems there. So, for example, with employee managed funds like 401ks, accessing the funds can be sometimes pretty difficult. And most plans will provide you a list of events that would allow for distributions from those employee managed plans like 401ks. But each plan is a little bit different, but they can put limitations on access to those employee managed funds before age 59 and a half. They could put limitations on those early distributions. Now, some plans may offer the opportunity for loans or other hardship distributions prior to 59 and a half, but typically they make it very difficult to access your funds. Now, IRAs are different. So IRAs aren't managed by the employer. You've chosen to roll them over, or somehow you have an IRA. The funds inside of an IRA prior to 59 and a half are accessible, but, and you might be aware of this already, if you were to take that money out prior to 59 and a half, unless you have a specialized exception, then not only do you pay the tax, but also you pay a 10% penalty. So you're going to pay a penalty on that distribution if you're to take the money out prior to 59 and a half out of an IRA, unless you have some of those exceptions, such as for higher education. So keep in mind that your money is kind of locked down in these retirement plans to a certain extent. And then another important milestone is age 50. So age 50, you now have what we call catch-up contributions. So for those over the age of 50, in 2019, you would be able to add or contribute an extra $1,000 to your traditional or your Roth IRA. So the contribution limit is normally $6,000, but if you are age 50 or over, then you have what's the so-called catch-up contributions, where you can now contribute $7,000 instead of the $6,000. So that's an option. So that's an important milestone. So a big age of 50, you can now contribute more than just the $6,000 to an IRA. And then also at age 50, and this doesn't apply to everyone, but there is an exception for public safety employees. So if you're police or federal law enforcement, some firefighters, you do have access to your 401k, 403b, or 457 plans. At age 50, you can take distributions from the qualified plan account without triggering the early distribution plan if you separate from service. So in the year of your service, if you separate after you've reached age 50, you can take a distribution without penalty, understanding that a lot of times these individuals do retire early due to their federal service or public safety service. And then also at age 55, there is a qualified plan exception where if you do end your service, so this isn't just for public safety employees, but other individuals as well, is that if you are you quit, you're fired, you retire, age 55 or older from a qualified plan, you can take distributions. There are some limitations on this, but it is important to understand that if you do end your service with an employer and you are over the age of 55, you would be able to take a distribution without penalty. So you could terminate service, receive a distribution from the plan, and still qualify for the exception and take the money out penalty-free. So far we've talked about some important milestones. So from the time you're born as a minor, as soon as you have taxable compensation, you can start contributing to your retirement accounts. If you're to take money out prior to 59 and a half, unless you have some special exceptions, then that money could be penalized, or you might not be able to take the money out at all if it's an employee managed plan. And then after age 50, you have your catch-up contributions where you can contribute more than that 2019 limit of $6,000 to a traditional or Roth IRA. You're able to contribute an extra $1,000 to those accounts. And then at age 50, there's an exception for public safety employees. And age 55, we have a qualified plan exception that is available if you terminate, if your service is terminated, you can take early distributions prior to 59 and a half without penalty. So then that takes us to age 59 and a half. And this begins what we call the sweet spot of retirement planning. Because now we can take money out of those qualified accounts without penalty. Now, if it is a traditional account, after 59 and a half, we still have to pay that tax, but there would not be a 10% penalty. So for our clients who've reached age 59 and a half, we call it the sweet spot, because between the ages 59 and a half and 70 and a half, it's the time where there's the most flexibility with regards to these retirement accounts. So it gives us a lot of planning opportunities, and some of those planning opportunities we talk about in our weekly workshops, where we go over tax planning and try to manage taxes and avoid paying unnecessary taxes. And if you want to learn more about some of these strategies, you can attend one of our workshops. We hold these workshops about once a week at one of our different locations. And space is limited, but we have workshops coming up Thursday, March 21st at 2 p.m. At our Novi location. So Novi, Thursday, March 21st at 2 p.m. And then we have Bloomfield Hills on Wednesday, March 20th at 6 o'clock. So that's at our Bloomfield Hills office. And then in April, we're going to be in the Brighton, Ann Arbor, and Livonia office. So these workshops, legal, financial, and tax planning for the second half of life, talking about how to make sure your money lasts as long as you do, and leaving a legacy of your choice, not leaving it up to the government or the IRS to determine your fate. So if you do want more information on that, feel free to visit our website at thechrisberryshow.com or give us a call at 810-355-2584 or email us at askchris@thechrisberryshow.com. So we're talking about that sweet spot between age 59 and a half and age 70 and a half. So during the sweet spot, not only do you have free access to your money where you can take it out without penalty, now you do have to pay a tax at this point, but you do have the opportunity to access this money penalty-free. And also during the sweet spot, there's no requirement to take any unneeded money from the IRA. Because once you reach the year in which you're no longer 70 and a half, so basically when you turn 70 and a half, you must take money out of the IRA and pay taxes on the distributions. So if you do have traditional IRAs, you have to take money out at 70 and a half. So that's why we call this the sweet spot. So when you're in this IRA sweet spot, the planning advantages really can be fully exploited, where there's a lot of different options to consider when you turn 59 and a half, and especially if you're looking at retirement. There's some strategies where, let's say you retire at 62, you don't necessarily need to claim Social Security right away, but you're going to have an income gap. And how do you solve that income gap? This is where we could look at moving money from those tax-deferred accounts to cover your income needs. Or this also might be a time to consider things like Roth conversions, where we take that money that was tax-deferred, move it into a Roth, or maybe we move it into some type of asset protection vehicle to protect against long-term care costs. Or we look at funding index universal life insurance policy that could grow tax-free, could provide a long-term care benefit, and also provide a death benefit for your beneficiaries. But it's just one of those, that important milestone of 59 and a half, it allows for a lot of these little bit more sophisticated tax planning strategies. And especially given the fact that in 2025, unless something else happens, taxes are scheduled to go up, meaning the money you're paying now, or the income tax bracket you're in now, depending on where you fall, might be 3% higher in 2025. So this retirement sweet spot between 59 and a half and 70 and a half especially if you think taxes are going to go up, which they're scheduled to do. This is the sweet spot when we consider getting money out of those tax-deferred accounts. Because you have free access to it. You're not forced to take the money out, and you're not penalized to take the money out. The only thing you have to do is pay the tax, which sometimes can be hard to swallow, but I would rather pay maybe $20,000 in tax this year versus it being $30,000 in tax in 2025 potentially. So it's almost like all signs point to this, where if you are between 59.5 and 70.5 right now, you have some unique tax planning opportunities. Because as we do our workshops, a lot of times we'll ask people, do you think taxes are going to go up or down in the future? And almost everyone raises their hand to say, yeah, my taxes most likely will go up. Because why? We're over $22 trillion in debt. We have all these baby boomers retiring, and we're at a historically low marginal tax bracket. So if that's the case, why do we defer paying taxes as long as possible? Doesn't it make sense to pay the tax sooner rather than later? I know it's hard to write that check, but again, if taxes are going to be higher in the future, for example, right now, if you're in the 12% tax bracket, that easily could be the 15% tax bracket in 2025. And if you just look at moving money on an annual basis, we call this bracket bumping, you can pay the tax sooner rather than later, and then by the time we get to 2025, you've minimized the tax. You're going to pay less tax because we can't really control what the market's going to do, but we can control when we're going to be taxed on our tax-deferred accounts. So the sweet spot between 59.5 and 70.5 gives us really the most planning opportunities because this is the only time the government gives us free access to our tax-deferred accounts. Now, we still have to pay the tax on it, but we're not going to be penalized if we take that money out sooner rather than later. So this is where tax planning really becomes an interesting conversation. And unfortunately, I don't think enough people are having this conversation. Now, you might have someone doing your taxes or a CPA or tax preparer, but too often they're looking in the past, not necessarily looking in the future. Especially right now, try to get a hold of a tax person right now. It can be a little bit difficult. So this is why we take a holistic approach to helping clients plan for legal, financial, and tax planning for the second half of life, because all these things really fit together. So join me as we continue talking about retirement savings milestones and talking about making sure that your pot of gold lasts at least as long as you do. So stick with me as we continue the conversation. All right, we were talking about the retirement savings milestones, a century of planning. And we covered that initially, as soon as you're born, if you have taxable income, taxable compensation, you can start contributing to your retirement accounts. So obviously, being born, that's an important milestone. And then we talked about age 59.5, taking distributions prior to 59.5. Depending on if you have an exception or not, you're going to take a penalty. So you are in partnership with the government, where if you take that money out, unless you have a special exception, you're going to have to pay a penalty. And then at age 50, so big 50, now you have your catch-up contributions. So at this point, in 2019, you can contribute up to $6,000 to a Roth or traditional account. But at age 50, you can contribute an extra $1,000. So not only is it a big milestone because you're turning the big 50, but also you're allowed to contribute an additional $1,000 to your Roth or traditional or Roth IRA. And then also at age 50, there's an important exception for public safety employees where if they're terminated either due to retiring or being fired or quitting, they can take the money out penalty-free. Now, you have to pay a tax, of course, if you're to take that money out, but your 401ks or 403b, 457, those defined contribution plans or defined benefits, you're able to take that money out tax-free. And then similarly at age 55, there's a qualified plan exception as well under the tax code, where if an individual not considered a public safety employee but participates in a qualified plan, the same exception to that early distribution penalty I just mentioned also applies. But for non-public safety employees, that exception is at age 55. And then that brings us to age 59.5, which starts the sweet spot with regards to retirement savings milestones. So between 59.5 and 70.5, this is that unique time when you can pull the money out, still pay the tax, but you can pull the money out without paying a penalty for pulling your money out. So you don't have that 10% penalty. And then keep in mind at age 70.5, you're forced to take that money out even if you don't want to. So we call it the sweet spot because there's a lot of options as it relates to tax planning. So for example, even if you're working, it might make sense to do what we call bracket bumping, where you look at how much income tax you have coming in, or income you have coming in that's taxed, and if there's space between the next tax bracket, let's say there's $20,000, then maybe you look at moving that $20,000 from the tax deferred to somewhere else, whether that somewhere else is into an asset protection trust, into a Roth, into an index universal life insurance policy. It all just depends on what your goals are. But even if you're still working, you should look at bracket bumping. And ideally, you're going to use other non-tax deferred assets to pay the extra income if you're looking at doing that type of planning, because otherwise you might have to pull out more from your IRA to pay for that tax, and that could bump you up into a slightly larger tax bracket if you don't set it up properly. And why this is important is that with tax rates at a historic low, this should be something that everyone is looking at. And I'm surprised when I mention this in workshops, people are surprised about this strategy. And it's something I'm surprised more CPAs and tax preparers aren't talking to their clients about. But it's not that surprising because a lot of times those tax preparers, they're just looking at what happened the previous year. They're not really looking at what's happening in the future. And again, tax rates right now are at historic lows, where in 2025, let alone whatever happens in 2020, taxes are scheduled to go up. So doesn't it make sense to pay the tax sooner rather than later? And this is something that we talk about in our workshops. We have weekly legal, financial, and tax planning workshops for those in that sweet spot of 59.5 to 70.5. Anyone can attend, but I would say a majority of the participants are in that sweet spot. So it is something that we talk about, tax planning. How can we minimize the amount of taxes, focus on growing our money versus growing money for the government, because I'd rather spend my money than let the government spend my money. So after 59.5, the next big milestone is age 70.5. And this is when IRA owners are no longer eligible to contribute to your traditional IRAs because you've turned 70.5. Now, you could contribute to your 401k if you're still working at that employer, but your traditional IRA, you would not be able to contribute any longer. And also owners of your traditional IRAs, your SEP IRAs, simple IRAs, now will have those RMDs, those required minimum distributions. And for a lot of people, this is that hidden retirement savings tax time bomb, where people are surprised, sometimes not, about just how much tax they have to start paying on those tax-deferred accounts. Because when you turn 70.5, what happens is, whether you like it or not, you have to start taking out required minimum distributions. So basically the way it works is they take a look at the amount of IRA money you have, and now what happens is that at age 70.5, you have to take out roughly 3.65%. Meaning you have to take out a portion of your IRA, and that amount grows every year. And that could be surprising to people as well, as the percentage actually grows every year. And so that money that you've been growing kind of tax deferred, now you have to start paying that tax. So you might look at that big number you have inside of your IRA or your 401k, but understand in addition to that big number, you also have a big tax bill that also has to be paid. And it's kind of interesting in our workshops, we sometimes have a discussion around, well, why do we defer paying taxes as long as possible? And sometimes people will bring up, well, that's kind of what we're told to do. That was kind of the Main Street idea, and I think government kind of pushed that on people because in addition to growing this money or saving this money, they're also growing the tax bill. Because what a lot of people forget is they lose a lot of the common deductions they had while they were working. So many people are surprised that sometimes they're in a higher tax bracket in retirement than they were while they were working. In fact, I got out of a meeting with a client the other day that's exactly what he expressed to me as we reviewed everything. Because at 70 and a half, now you have your required minimum distributions that have to come out, whether you like it or not. Now you can invest that money in something else, but you still have to pay the income tax. So you have your RMDs, which are taxed. Sometimes people have pensions. Guess what? Your pension is taxed. So now if you have a pension that gets taxed, you have RMDs that are taxed. What else might also get taxed? Your Social Security. So you have these sources of income, and then the way the tax code has been structured, a lot of people lose a lot of the common deductions that they were counting on while they were working. For example, things like a mortgage. A lot of people have paid off their mortgage in retirement. Children. Raise your hand, unless you're driving, raise your hand if you plan on having more children in retirement. Those dependents, most people don't. The contributions to the 401ks and IRAs, those go away. And then charitable contributions. Not that you aren't charitably inclined, but a lot of times you contribute your time, not your money, in retirement. And unfortunately, time is not tax deductible. So a lot of people have more income than they thought coming in, and they have lost a lot of the deductions on the bottom end. And then on top of that, what happens is that what happens if we go from a married couple to now one spouse passes away? You go from married filing jointly to a single filing. So add all this up, and a lot of people are actually paying more tax than they expect in retirement. And that starts at 70 and a half with those required minimum distributions. So that's why we say it's that sweet spot between 59 and a half and 70 and a half. You have the most options. You have the most freedom to do true tax planning. Now, turning 70 and a half means IRA owners must start taking out their required minimum distributions and can no longer contribute to your traditional IRA. But it's not all bad, because there are some additional planning opportunities that become available. Especially right now, there's what's called, for charitably inclined individuals, we could do qualified charitable distributions, or a QCD, you might hear the acronym. So these are available to IRA owners and beneficiaries who are age 70 and a half and older. And what happens is you make a donation directly from the IRA to the charity, and nothing can be received in exchange for this donation. And it's a way to really lower the amount of taxes paid. Now, a tax deduction for the contribution cannot be taken, but the amount transferred from the IRA is excluded from income and can count towards that RMD. So if you are charitably inclined after age 70 and a half, there are some things we can do to help mitigate those required minimum distributions. Another strategy after 70 and a half would be still looking at doing that bracket bumping. So right now, if you're listening and you're over the age of 70 and a half, and there's space in your tax bracket, let's say you're at the 12% tax bracket right now, and maybe there's another $40,000 before you get into the next higher tax bracket. Maybe it makes sense to pay that tax sooner rather than later, because if you don't do anything, potentially in 2025, that 12% tax bracket is now a 15% tax bracket. So even if you are over the age of 70 and a half, there's still some planning options. So there's some new doors that open up with those QCDs, qualified charitable distributions, but also you can engage in bracket bumping, which is really available to anyone no matter what your age is, as long as you're over 59 and a half. And that brings us to some little-known exceptions. The first one is the age 75 old money exception for 403Bs. So if you have a 403B that was, and you participated in the fund before 1987, then you're basically grandfathered in, and it allows you to not take your RMDs until, you're not forced to take your RMDs until age 75. So it's a kind of one of those little known exceptions, but it is important to understand that it is an exception. It is available to those individuals who do have 403Bs, money still in 403Bs. And then there's another age or another milestone. So you think we're running out of ages and milestones, but we still have some more. Another one is for age 65. So if an IRA purchases what's called a qualifying longevity annuity contract, a QLAC, within their traditional IRA, then the age 85 milestone is relevant, because QLAC values are excluded from a retirement account owner's balance for RMD calculation purposes until age 85. So when I mentioned that 3.65% that was required for your RMDs at age 70 and a half, well, if some of that money is QLAC money, that money is not included in that calculation for the RMD until you reach age 85. Now that applies to probably none of the listeners, but I think it's just kind of interesting that there is another milestone built in there. And if you think I'm done, you're wrong. Surely you must be thinking that, okay, there can't be anything else for anyone over the age of 85. But I'm going to bring up two more milestones, age milestones out there. So the first one is age 111. Age 111. And the reason I bring this up is this is the last age listed on the single life table for inherited IRAs and carries a corresponding factor of 1. And I'll explain what that means in a second. But then the granddaddy and the last age, the last milestone I'm going to mention, so this is the IRA granddaddy, it's age 115. And it's the final year on the IRS's uniform life table. So what this means is, what happens is, as I mentioned, that at age 70 and a half, you have to take out 3.65%. Well, that number grows until it basically becomes 100% for an inherited IRA at age 111, or if it's your IRA at age 115. So effectively, if you were to live to age 115, your IRA, you would have paid all of the tax. So typically what happens is we pass away prior to age 115, and so what happens is then it becomes an inherited IRA where that beneficiary can choose to pay all the tax all at once, or they can choose to stretch out that IRA over their life expectancy. And so what happens is we go from that uniform life table that goes to 115 for an IRA owner, we switch over to the single life table for an inherited IRA at age 111. Long story short, let's say you're 70 and a half, you have to take out 3.65%. You pass away, you leave it to a 40-year-old looking at now their single life table. They might only have to take out 2%. But long story short, what we've done is we've covered all of the age milestones for retirement accounts. From the time you're born, you can start contributing to an IRA as long as you have taxable income coming in, taxable contribution or taxable income coming in. For example, if you're a minor child and you're helping at the business, or you picking up some odd jobs during the summer, if you have taxable income coming in, you can open up an IRA and contribute. And then under age 59 and a half, if you pull money out, you're going to be penalized unless you have an exception. Age 50, you have contribution limits that have increased because now you have the catch-up provisions. Age 50, also for federal employees or public safety employees, you can potentially pull money out if you terminate employment. Likewise, similarly for age 55. Ages 59 and a half to age 70 and a half, this is the sweet spot. 70 and a half, we have our required minimum distributions. Bracket bumping is always an option. Age 75, we have the old 403B rule, and then age 85, QLACs, and then age 111 and 115 are our payout models. So hopefully you found that interesting. Stick with us as we get into our last segment of this show, answering your questions submitted from our listeners. Thank you. Welcome back to the Chris Berry Show. So now we're going to get into our question and answer segment of the show. And if you do have questions, you can ask those anytime by shooting us an email at askchris@thechrisberryshow.com, and that's Berry, Berry. Or visit our website, thechrisberryshow.com, or give us a call, 810-355-2584. And if you want your questions answered in person, then I suggest you attend one of our upcoming workshops. We have some in the Novi and Bloomfield Hills and Brighton area. So Brighton, Tuesday, March 19th at our Brighton office at 10 a.m. we're going to be in Novi Thursday, March 21st at our Novi office. That's going to be 2 p.m. And then Wednesday, March 20th, we're going to be at our Bloomfield Hills location, 6 p.m. And the workshop's usually about an hour and a half where we go over legal, financial, and tax planning for retirements. And we typically try to limit the number of people in the workshop, so space is limited, because we want to make sure if you do have questions, we can answer those questions right there. They're a lot of fun, always great questions, great feedback on those workshops. So again, if you do want to attend one of the workshops, give us a call at 810-355-2584 or shoot us an email, or you can register online, click through and see a list of our upcoming workshops. So with that, I'm going to get into our first question, and this is from Dave. So moved mom with dementia from Florida to Michigan. How to sell her condo for her care and assisted living. And this is from Dave. He just got guardianship and conservatorship for his mom in Wayne County. He has, her total assets are about $280,000. The condo in Florida is paid for. Maintenance and taxes come into about $6,000 a year. Mother's, the condo is supposed to go to a granddaughter if she passes. Can I sell the condo and use it to help pay for her long-term care in the assisted living, which is running about $5,000 per month? So this is a common situation. So Dave's taking care of his mom. Mom's now in an assisted living. What's the purpose of having the house? Can Dave sell the house? So because it's a guardianship and conservatorship, basically everything now has to go through the court process. So ideally, we're keeping things out of court, where if we have a well-drafted financial and medical power of attorney, typically that would help us avoid the guardianships and conservatorships. Because now every decision like this has to be approved by the court. But if mom had just signed a well-drafted financial power of attorney or medical power of attorney, that would have given you the authority, Dave, to be able to make these decisions without having to go through the court process. So can you sell the condo in Florida? The answer is yes, as long as the court allows you to do so. Now, there's some questions that I would ask, or some questions and comments. So first, depending on what mom's goals are, especially if she wants the condo to go to someone specific after death, you might not want to quite sell the condo yet if she has additional funds. Because a condo, even though it's in Florida, Michigan law would control. If mom were to go from assisted living to now needing nursing home and try to qualify for Medicaid, then that condo would be an exempt asset while she's alive. And then the one thing we'd want to do is what's called a ladybird deed, to say the condo is in mom's name while she's alive, but then after she passes away, it avoids probate, avoids estate recovery, where state of Michigan place a lien on the home, and goes to whoever's named as a beneficiary. So that ladybird deed acts like a beneficiary designation for real estate. So you mentioned she has about $280,000 of total assets. Let's say that's liquid assets, and then she has this condo. If that's the case, I would look at spending her liquid assets before we get to selling the condo, because those liquid assets would not be protected if, as you say in your email question here, that the condo is supposed to go to a granddaughter upon death. So that would be a way to protect that condo, preserve those assets to meet one of her goals. Now, the comment I would have is that this is why a lot of times we like to set up what's called an asset protection trust, like a castle trust. A castle trust is a form of asset protection trust. And when we set up one of these trusts, what we do is we move real estate, like a condo or other pieces of real estate, into that trust, because even though they're exempt while you're alive, a lot of times families look at selling that condo or that house, that exempt piece of property, to pay for assisted living. Because if mom is in an assisted living, what good is having that condo? It's just more work, more expenses. So a lot of times families want to be able to sell that property. And to be able to sell that property and protect it, we would want it inside of a trust like a castle trust. So if we could go back in time, it would be a much easier decision if we could have the asset in a castle trust, because then whether it was a home or whether it was cash, it would have been protected, assuming we can make it 5 years from the time we set up that castle trust and move the house into that trust. So yes, you can sell the condo. Now that said, you do have to run it through the court system, because you do have that guardianship and conservatorship. But if the court says that you can, then you can go ahead and sell it. Now, I probably wouldn't recommend selling it right now. I would let some of her other funds dwindle before selling that condo. But either way, make sure that whatever planning you're doing is what's best for mom, and that's your role as a guardian and a fiduciary for mom, is you have to act in her best interest. So acting in her best interest, I'd look at trying to ensure her money lasts at least as long as she does. So I would look at using some of her liquid assets before you get to selling that house. All right, so next question. I took out half of my 401k and put it into a 5-year annuity, which will be coming due in April 2020. Can I put it back into an IRA with no charge and then pay the taxes on the amount and convert it to a Roth? I was told I could not go directly from an annuity to a Roth, and this question is from Brett. So, Brett, I guess I'm going to need some clarification. So I took out half of my 401k and put it into a 5-year annuity. So I'm guessing what you really did there is you rolled out some of that money from the IRA, or from the 401k, and now that annuity you purchased is actually wrapped inside of an IRA. Because I'm guessing you didn't pay the taxes on those pre-tax dollars when you purchased that annuity. So 401ks and IRAs, think of those as kind of like wrappers. There's different types of assets you can invest, or different asset classes that you can invest inside of those wrappers, whether it's a Roth or IRA or 401k, any type of qualified account. You can invest in mutual funds, stocks, bonds, even real estate, and annuities. All of those can be owned by an IRA or 401k or a Roth. So I'm guessing when you say I took out half of my 401k to put it into a 5-year annuity, I'm guessing what you really did is you rolled it over. So you took that money from a 401k, it remained tax-free, but now instead of being at the employer, you rolled it over into an annuity that is inside of an IRA. So an easy way to do it would be just look at one of your statements. Does it say it's in Brett's name, or does it say in Brett's IRA at the top? So most likely it's a qualified annuity. So if that's the case, and now the money has, the annuity has gotten out of its surrender period, because that's one of the things with, typically, I'm guessing this is a fixed index annuity, a 5-year annuity. A lot of times we call this a MYGA, multi-year guaranteed annuity. Now that it's due, you can either choose to leave it where it's at, or you can invest it in something else. So you ask, can I put it into an IRA with no charge and then pay taxes and convert it to a Roth? Well, I think it probably is inside of an IRA. And what you could do is you could kind of make it more liquid, so just put it into a money account. And then from there, you could decide to pay taxes, roll it out of there and convert it into a Roth. And then once it's in a Roth, you can basically invest it however you want. But most likely you'd have to take it out of that annuity first. But to answer your question, yes, you could do a Roth conversion. The only thing you'd have to do is just pay the taxes on that. So hopefully that was helpful. Next, do I have to do a will in both countries if I am a dual citizen? So this question is from Andrew. I have significant assets in Canada as well as in Michigan. Do I need to do a will in both countries? Well, the answer to this is it depends, which is kind of the typical lawyer answer. But what I would recommend is that you actually sit down with an attorney in both countries, or an attorney that can practice in both countries. I cannot. I'm not licensed in Canada. But understand different countries have different rules regarding how assets transfer, how assets pass upon death. They have different rules with regards to taxes as well. And so since you do have significant assets in Canada as well as in Michigan, understand those assets are going to pass per Canadian rules, and then also your Michigan or United States assets are going to pass per Michigan or United States rules. So here, like we've talked about previously, there's 4 ways assets transfer out of your name. So through joint ownership, beneficiary designation, trust, or probate. In Michigan, all a will does is gives instructions to that probate court on how to administer that estate. So if you're looking at avoiding probate, I wouldn't focus on just getting a will here in Michigan. I would look at one of the other transfer mechanisms as a way to transfer those assets. Whether you rely on joint ownership, which is great for a married couple, or rely on beneficiary designations. So you could have a beneficiary of your IRA or life insurance, or you could have your assets in a trust, whether it's a living trust that avoids probate and controls the distribution upon death, or it could be an asset protection trust like a castle trust, which can avoid probate, control distribution upon death, but now builds in a level of asset protection. But a will, again, all it does is it gives instructions to probate court. So the question really isn't, do I need a will in both Canada as well as Michigan? It would be sitting down with an attorney to walk you through how that estate administration process works in each country. And like I said, in Michigan, 4 ways assets transfer out of your name. Canada might work a little bit differently. Also, there might be some hidden taxes that you would have to consider on the Canadian side that here in Michigan and the United States, unless you have over $11 million, there isn't any federal estate taxes, nor is there any state estate tax. There isn't any death tax that we have to worry about. I'm not sure what it is on the Canadian side. So there's a lot of factors that go into it. I would sit down with a professional on both sides of the border. So next question is, what should I do with my 401k after I retire? And this is from Steve. So 2 years ago, when I turned 59 and a half, I rolled over a portion of my 401k into an IRA account. I recently retired, and my remaining 401k account has gained favorably compared to my rollover account. I don't plan to tap either account yet, maybe in the future. Should I leave my 401k account and roll it over later then, or are there better options to invest in? So Steve, it's not a function of whether it's a 401k or IRA of how the investments performed in those accounts. Again, those accounts are just wrappers. You could have the same exact investments in your 401k as well as inside of your IRA. Now your 401k, it's an employer managed plan, and they can put different limitations on that 401k. For example, they can limit who you can name as a beneficiary. They could limit your investment choices inside of your 401k. Versus your IRA offers you a lot more flexibility. You have more freedom in what you can invest in. You have more freedom in who you can name as beneficiaries, and just you have a lot more flexibility. So that's why a lot of people, they roll over or they move their money from that 401k because they like the additional flexibilities of the IRA. So given that, should you leave your 401k where it's at because it performed better investment-wise? Well, you could recreate whatever those investments inside of that 401k inside of an IRA, but now you'd have a lot more flexibility with regards to what you can do with that money. So if you think your 401k is invested better or had more favorable returns than your IRA, what I might do is have your IRA investments set up the same as the 401k investments and then roll that 401k out just because you do have some more flexibility with it being an IRA. For example, one of the things that you can do with an IRA that typically you cannot with a 401k is name a trust as a beneficiary of that IRA. By naming that trust, what you can do is you can protect that stretch out, so protect those required minimum distributions for the next generation. And then we had this Clark versus Ramaker Supreme Court case from 2014 that said IRAs aren't protected, but if you name it in a trust, then you can build in a lifetime of asset protection for your beneficiaries. So having the flexibility to name a trust as a beneficiary of an IRA is just one of the reasons why we typically don't like to keep things at the employer, at that 401k. We like to roll it over so we can have more flexibility in investment choices. So you can have it invested exactly the same way it was at the 401k, but now you just have more flexibility in how the plan is administered. So hopefully that was helpful, Steve. I would probably, in your situation, because you are 59 and a half, well, actually that doesn't have a factor, but I would look at rolling over that 401k into an IRA, and then you can invest it exactly however you want, however that 401k originally was invested. So hopefully that was helpful. And if you do want to learn more or see the Chris Berry Show live, you can attend one of our workshops. Get some more information on that by calling us at 810-355-2584. And we have workshops coming up in Bloomfield Hills, Brighton, and Novi, and then looking at Ann Arbor and Livonia and Brighton for April. And very excited, going to have someone talking about fitness for retirees, Cody Tustin, in an upcoming show. So make it a great week. Look forward to talking to you next week. Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Learn more about Chris Berry and the Elder Care Firm by visiting online at michiganestateplanning.com. That's michiganestateplanning.com. You can also call Chris Berry at 888-390-4360. 888-390-4360. This program content reflects the opinions of Chris Berry and his guests, not the Elder Care Firm, Prosperity Capital Advisors, or the C.J. Berry Group, and is subject to change at any time without notice. Content provided herein is for informational purposes only and should not be used or construed as investment or legal advice or a recommendation regarding the purchase or sale of any security or to follow any legal or tax strategy. There's no guarantee that the strategist's statements, opinions, or forecast provided herein will prove to be correct. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. Indices are not available for direct investment. Any investor who attempts to mimic the performance of an index would incur fees and expenses, which would reduce returns. All investing involves risk, including the potential for loss of principal. There's no guarantee that any investment plan or strategy will be successful. We recommend that you consult with a professional dedicated to your needs. This program is furnished by the Elder Care Firm.